Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you as ever from the beautiful beaches of the last free state in America, Florida. Although with recent events, other states are becoming incrementally freer, which we're excited about. It's the
Some of them.
25th of February, 2025, and I have visiting today in the studios Chuck Ellis, host of the Muddy Waters podcast up in Maine. So I assume he's a little chillier than I am right now, and there are no palm trees out his window. Chuck, thanks for taking the time to come on.
Thanks for having me on. Sorry if I interrupted you a little bit there, but you said some of them are getting more free. State of Maine, where I am, where it is cooler. It's actually not a bad day today. It's actually like I could reasonably during the day when the sun's out be outside without a jacket on and I would be okay. But which is good for winter in Maine,
Right.
February. It's
But
not
would a
too bad.
Floridian be able to do that?
No, no,
No.
no. Neither will my wife when she gets here. If you look here, my wife is Rwandan, but currently, until we can get her here, going through the legal process, she's in Kenya. She would be very, very cold in
Very, very
in
cool.
this.
Well, I want to kick off. I'm sure you guys have stuff to talk about. I would love to set off with a tiny smoke bomb into the room. Donald Trump, I believe, bitch slapped your governor publicly a couple of days ago when he's like, if you fail to follow federal law in relation to not letting boys compete in girls' sports and you don't ditch this DEI crap, you're getting no federal funding. And she made some snarky comment about "we'll see you in court," and then her foul-mouthed chief of staff, Jeremy Kennedy, apparently cursed out the Trump team and stormed out of the room like a hissy fit. So thoughts on that, and then anything else you'd like to chat about?
I think what do they say? No press is bad press. Well, that's not actually always true, but in the state of Maine, we don't often make it into national politics. But recently, when we do, it's not been good.
Right,
And
that's a bummer.
yeah, although the conservatives in Maine love it because your Republicans here are really appreciative of Trump telling her to do what is obvious and what 80% of Americans want her to do.
Right.
But she seems to be like one of the things that's been really interesting for me is nationally it looks like I hear rumblings that the Democrat Party has realized that they made a mistake in like being so stuck on these identity politics and having and that's why they lost here in the
Yeah.
state of Maine. They're doubling down. They
Oh yeah.
act as though they have a 20-point lead, but Trump
Yeah.
only lost Maine by 7%. And the more they
Right.
double down on stuff that like 64% of Democrats nationally don't agree with. So 80% of Mainers, 75, 80% of Mainers are not with them on this issue, but she's doubling down. In fact, I saw something today that said that she was going to have, I don't know how she would do this, but basically withhold tax payments from Mainers to the federal government. That's what she's
Oh,
going to try to do.
fantastic. See, well, I've got a private sort of no, it's a cross between a lottery and a bingo game with friends as to which governor is getting a mugshot and an orange jumpsuit first. Is it going to be Jay Pritzker? Is it going to be maybe yours is in the running now? Like you
I'd
can't,
say so.
especially what I love about Democrats is they lack irony and are immune to hypocrisy. They chanted at us for 4 years
Yeah.
or 9 years that Trump was a danger to democracy. And
Yep.
now that they've lost, and they lost the popular vote too, their ever holy popular vote they bitched about. Now that they
Yep.
have lost and been shown the door, now it's all about we're going to resist federal law. Oh, please do. Please. Tom Homan is going to lock you up. And I'm going to roar with laughter when they clap the cuffs on Fat Jay Pritzker and they have to get bigger cuffs to go around his big chubby wrists. You're not allowed to violate
Yeah.
federal law. No one is. And they told us for 9 years, no one's above the law. Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. And here it
Yeah.
comes.
Yeah, I mean the gaslight is strong with these people. They're fully willing to call somebody else out on the things that they themselves do. The reality is here that they are actually, again, they're in violation of the law, and like that's just plain and simple what it is.
Yeah.
And it's interesting though. I was having a conversation with a lawyer yesterday, about like, okay, where does the federal government's end and the state begin, right, and vice versa around this issue? Because one of the things that's interesting is in the state of Maine, we added gender identity to the Maine Human Rights Act, so which I think is really interesting. And so to some degree, I feel like the governor's in a little bit of a rock and a hard place, although she thinks she's winning somehow. She's probably going to be running for U.S. Senate against Susan Collins is the expectation in 2026 because her term is up and she can't run again. Right. I think she's trying to use this to get publicity and fundraising and all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting because, like, first of all, federal law is the law of the land on this issue. It's been, precedent goes back to 1972 with the establishment of Title IX. So regardless of what state law might say, she has to follow federal law, especially if she wants federal funding. That's just a fact. But it is interesting because they do have this Maine Human Rights Act, and it's theoretically possible that, like, if they go against that, then schools could be at risk for being sued from people for discriminating according to Maine's, which is interesting.
Can I ask you a question? Because you're living up in the Northeast, where I'm originally from, and I came down to America from the People's Republic of New Yorkistan 11 years ago. Trump said it at CPAC, and this is one of those issues, right? He said this whole gender crap of Bobby came in 43rd in every swim meet, and suddenly senior year discovered he's Sally and takes gold medals away from girls who work their whole lives. Like, as he said, this is a 90-10 issue, and I'm not sure who the 10 is. This seems to be one of the weirdest hills the Democrats have chosen to die on, especially since most women rights fighters in the 60s and 70s were women and Democrats. Like, when did this brainworm attack the Democrats? I mean, in San Francisco, when you apply for housing aid or any kind of aid, they allow you to choose from one of 97 recognized genders. But my question is, like, literally, what in the holy fuck does that mean? What does it mean, and why does anyone beyond 700 people out of 350 million with blue hair, multiple piercings, and lots of daddy issues care?
Like, this whole conversation is just hard to understand in general. Like, I mean, forget 97. I have a hard time understanding, like, a man who wants to say that he's a woman, right? Like, I have a hard time understanding that, especially when, you've probably seen, Matt Walsh's "What is a Woman," right? And it can't even define. There's no definition of what a woman is outside of the circular definition.
Who's going to rule on legal cases relating to gender who can't define what a woman is, and the Democrat thinks that's just peachy.
Yeah, so it's really hard to understand how a reasonable, intelligent person who's paying attention to what's actually going on in the world and thinking and using their brain can come to a conclusion that there are 97 genders, or that there are more than two genders, right? There are two genders, male and female. And gender, it's kind of interesting because they claim that we the conservatives or the culture, whatever, created these gender norms and all this other kind of stuff. But gender itself was a creation of the left. We used to have sex. When I was a kid growing up, it was sex. Nobody talked about gender. Are you a male or are you a female? Now, if you can be a masculine male, you can be a feminine male, I should say, or a masculine female. We used to call those tomboys, right? And so, like, this place that we're in right now, where people, they can't define what it is, but it's so important for us to agree with them and to use their pronouns and all this other stuff. I mean, first of all, that's just crazy. So it's been nice. One of the nice things about my wife being African is I get to go visit Africa, and I don't have to have these conversations. Everybody there knows what a boy is and what a girl is.
Florida and not have the conversations either. Quite frankly. I was on a conference call about 8 months ago, and I don't know how I got on this particular ridiculous call, because I'm a mining executive, but it wasn't related to mining. And people are going in the room like, "What are your pronouns?" And I said, "Mine are fucking off." Like, you got to be kidding me. Are we here for something? But the only thing that does make sense about why they do this is the American left. I've written a lot about this. The American left are Marxist in ways that most of them don't even know that they're Marxist, right? They were indoctrinated by their teachers at universities And core to the Marxist enterprise is to divorce people from reality. That is core to their enterprise,
Yep.
right? So the more they can make you the Leninist ideal, Stalinist ideal, Pol Pot ideal, and Chinese Communist Party ideal is if they can force you to say publicly things that you know are not true in order to keep a roof over your head and food in your bowl, they've won. So all broadly speaking, yes, this gender thing is stupid. They don't actually care about it either. A couple of freaks do, but predominantly the left, they don't care about this at all. What they care about is the literal thought control. They can demand that you say complete nonsense to keep your job so you don't get canceled. That's their whole goal. And they most of them know it. They know it's nonsense. They don't care.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. It's 2 + 2 = 5, right? To go to 1984, because that's the type of control that they want. When you are so afraid that if you even think something wrong, because in that book, it's interesting. Some people, I think both Brave New World and 1984, people see them as warnings. I see them as playbooks.
Oh yeah,
and that's what
who
they're
you
being.
are. Yeah.
Well, and I think, the guy that wrote George Orwell himself was a communist, right? And so, like, this idea that he wrote that as a warning is kind of interesting. Maybe he did, but if you're a communist, why are you trying to warn people against communism?
His thinking evolved over time. He started out on the left, and he found out, much like David Mamet did, who wrote a great book recently called The Secret Language, and Orwell, a great book to read if you haven't, is The Road to Wigan Pier, as he wrote a few years later. And it's all about his discovering that the British Communist Party were enslaved to Moscow, and they were a danger and a threat, and they part of the Comintern, and they had nothing about them was British, right? And a lot of people get seduced because it's so much of it sounds good. All of the left has a talent for naming things really well so that they completely obscure what it's about. Going all the way back to Bill Ayers and Students for a Democratic Society. Students for a Democratic Society were a terrorist organization that planted bombs around America. There's nothing democratic about them in any way, shape, or form. And that is one of, Barry Hussein Soetoro, who people later came to know as Barack Obama. That was one of his mentors in Chicago. And the depth of what they've done has gone on for so long. I push on this because until October 7th, and I wrote a book about the federal budget, which came out in April of last year, but until October 7th of 2023, I was the guy at cocktail parties you kind of edged away from, right? Because right, and someone asked me, and I stupidly thought they wanted to know, right? But the Marxist left made a choice in the 60s to infiltrate education in this country, and they've been good at it. Thus far, they've won. Thus far, they've been winning.
Yeah,
so when normal Americans woke up and saw all this craziness, and the real craziness is manifested in rampant Jew hatred on formerly great campuses, with with the very people that Hamas would rape and throw off a roof cheering for them. The Marxists have won.
Yeah.
The Marxists have won. When you've got queers for Palestine on a sign, they've won.
Yeah.
Because you are, by definition, a suicidal idiot cheering for people who would kill you if you came in range. And we have a big job to do in this country, reversing that damage, starting with destroying the Department of Education, which Ronald Reagan ran on in 1980 and then didn't kill it when he could have. But you're seeing so in Maine you still got this crazy governor. Do people is the tide shifting, or are Mainers still leaning heavily left?
Well, it's really interesting to see. I guess time will tell, right? Like I know that there's a lot of energy and there's a lot of hype, and again, the data shows that people are with us on this. But there's also a lot of pushback, and this is some of the Marxist stuff that you're talking about, the way in which they manipulate people. And instead of focusing on, for instance, with Doge, the amount of money that we're saving, they're like, but they could be doing it in a nicer way, right? There's this, like, I think there's a book called Toxic Empathy, which plays in, but
That's
like,
funny. I
so
like that.
with this big issue, like, they're like, well, I'm just upset that she posted that picture, because Laura Libby is the representative. Laura Libby is the one that kind of posted a picture of this boy into, like, as both John 2 years ago getting fifth as a boy, and Katie this year getting first as a girl. Posted that went viral. That's what caused all this to blow up. She was on
Yeah.
talk shows, and then I think it was on with Charlie Kirk, and Charlie's like, well, I'm gonna talk to Trump about this. And then you have Trump and a couple different places, one actually talking directly with the governors to Governor Mills. And so that's the response that you get. They're trying to paint Trump as a bully. And so I do think that generally, again, the people are with us. And I do think that this is potentially the type of issue that could determine the 2026 gubernatorial election and
Yeah.
House and Senate here, because again, the people aren't with them. The people, again, same number, 75-80% of people are not in favor of transgender treatment of minors, which we allow for without parental consent at ages
Crazy.
16 and 17. You can come from another state and you can get that at those ages without parental consent as well, which is absolutely crazy. We have abortion all the way up until birth. And now, a lot of Americans are okay with abortion, but not past, like, whatever it was, viability, not past viability. Yeah. Over 80% of Americans are not in favor of abortion past viability. And that includes people here in the state of Maine. And so I do think that there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of energy around resistance to Mills and the Democrats, because they're also driving the economy into the ground. Businesses are closing on the regular. And what is she doing right now? Well, she's introducing a 1%, I should say a $1 sales tax on cigarettes, 70% on every prescription. Like she's like, oh, we're spending too much money. We have this huge deficit. What am I going to do? I'm going to raise taxes and put more businesses out of business and ruin the state. And so this stuff, all of this stuff is happening, and it's snowballing. And one of the things that one of the gubernatorial candidates for 2026 made a comment that he thinks that what happened in the United States in 2024 is going to happen in Maine in 2026. That we're going to have a coalition of a bunch of people, moderate Dems, independents, libertarians, and Republicans, who are just like unified against that insanity, and that we are going to come out on top and take the House, the Senate, and the governor's race. That's a hope anyway, and I think that there's a lot of energy behind it.
That's good. I've been curious, having seen kind of both sides of this, family members on both sides. I mean, the old Democrat Party, they were for the workers against abusive capitalists, right? And in large measure, it was true, right? If an employer promised you, I'll give you $30 an hour, and you traveled across the state and you sat in a work camp and you worked 14-hour days, and at the end of 14 days, he said, you know what, I think a buck an hour is fairer. There was really not much you could do except resort to violence, which would usually not go well for you, because they were the ones with the picketing guards, right? So there used to be a real need, but the old school Democrat Party of balancing worker rights against the rights of capital, they largely won. They succeeded. Like, you can't bilk people out of their wages in this country. The police will come arrest you. Like, you can no longer do the things that inspired the labor movement, that inspired the union movement. And in many instances, arguably, it swung too far the other way, especially the federal government, where there should not be unions, right? So instead of, I've just been kind of fascinated by how political theories and political parties evolve. And since the Democrats had gotten a lot of energy out of leading the protests of Vietnam, which is odd because they got them into it, I think they just got used to being the party of, like, people run out in the streets and scream like lunatics. And that's just what they did. And so the next thing they found to yell about was this, and then that, and then this. And it never made any cohesive sense, to the point where they backed themselves into a corner of rampant absurdity that most people looked at. Again, it's Trump. You don't have to like him, but, like, that was one of the best things he said I've ever heard. So this is a 90-10 issue, and I don't know who the 10 is. Really? Yeah. Like, parents whose girls worked their asses off their whole lives and then had college scholarships taken from them and state championships taken from them because Bobby woke up and said, "I'm Sally." I mean, it's fucking nuts. I mean, again,
Yeah.
I don't care, Bobby. You're Sally, and you want to do that. Good for you. But when it comes to competitive things that have real world economic and academic consequences, pull open your shorts and look down and tell me what you see. Yeah, that's who you're running against. And most, I think 98% of Americans think that's logical. They don't think that's bigoted. They don't want homosexuals to be, discriminated against. They don't want anyone discriminated against.
Right.
But then
Yeah.
this weird thing of like, but I'm this whole freakish new thing that most people don't even agree exists, and I get to take away prizes from girls who worked hard. I think most people are kind of like, what the fuck is that? Again, it was a weird
Yeah.
hill to die on, and they died on it.
Yeah.
Chunks of
Yeah.
this election were about that,
Yeah.
and that's in a country where a lot of people personally despise Donald Trump.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's mind bending that they've chosen this hill to die on because, again, the people aren't with them. Most people know this. They get it. They understand it's not fair. Girls and boys are different. Men and women are different. We know this. We can see it with our eyes. But, I think part of it is playing to their base. I think this is like, again, I think Janet Mills is literally, she doesn't care about what happens in the state. She's using this as a tool to get money for her 2026 election. But why are the
Which
people...
is a weird strategy, given that strategy just lost, right? But never mind that. We've made that forever. Here's the thought, especially around Maine. We love lobster and the fisheries. What's the... I know that NOAA is a 4-letter word in Maine because a lot of what are viewed as potentially arbitrary restrictions on cod quotas, lobster quotas, and all that. Have the Mainers gotten more at peace with NOAA and sort of the fishing regulations, or where does that sit now? I haven't paid attention in years, so I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, so I mean, we're still fighting against NOAA. There have been some pushback. Or one of our congressmen, who's a Democrat but more of a moderate, has aided in some of the pushback against those regulations. But the hat that I'm wearing, and I should have figured out how to switch my my thing so you could read it, the mirror image, but it's NEFSA is established and is working to push back against those things. It's the New England Fisheries Stewardship Association is what NEFSA stands for. On my podcast, I actually had I was on a boat and we did a podcast with the guy who started that organization, talking about what's been going on, why he got started, and where the fight is. And the problem is still that the regulators, this is a problem at so many levels of our society. The regulators are so far removed from what's going on, and they're making decisions. And so what prompted him to start this organization was that in a year in which they were having record catch, it was so easy to catch a certain type of fish. NOAA said, "Oh no, there's not enough of those. You can only catch 20% of what you normally catch." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And so their measures, the tools that they're using to measure how much stock are out there are clearly invalid, and they don't know what they're doing. And so that's what he's been trying to do, and saying, "Hey, let's do this a little bit more intelligently," and continuing to push back and protect our fishermen, because we've got about we've got thousands of different businesses, and ultimately, I feel like part of what the federal government is doing a lot of times through these whatever you want to call them, the administrative state, Vivek's administrative state that he talks about, that's the fourth branch of government that was not elected and it's not in our Constitution, is create policies to reduce the number of businesses that are in that industry in order that they can control it better. And that's ultimately what the government's about. It wants to be, again, we talked about this with 2 + 2 = 5. It wants to be in control of everything. And so the fewer the companies, if we can make it difficult enough that some of these businesses go out of business, we can reduce the number of companies that are there, and then it's easier to lean on them and get them to do what we want.
Yeah, and argue that was the big chunk of what I wrote my entire book about, was shrinking federal Leviathan back down to basically where it was in 1945. Most of the departments that caused people the most problems were all created after 1950, and they could arguably all be wiped away with a stroke of a pen, and your life would just get better, right? So, but you point to something really important, and it's one of the best things I've seen about the greater evolution of citizen participation and awareness, is that especially when it comes to things like regulating agriculture or food related industries,
Yeah.
local is always better, right? There's a
Yep.
room, given the fact that the internet exists and big data manipulation is possible. Like, there are a lot of great things that, but it doesn't have to be the federal government. It could be, frankly, a university. It could be Carnegie Mellon. It could be the University of Maine. It could be a science department. Could do plenty of research work around fisheries dispersal and catch rates and all that stuff. There used to be a point to some degree of centralization because in the pre-internet era, data was hard to manipulate and move around. You had to collect it. Like, there were arguments that greater centralization made for greater efficiency. But with the internet and blockchain solutions and instantaneous data and the Internet of Things, like, it is possible to allow the Maine fisheries department to make the decisions about what should happen with fishing in Maine. Should they also, nothing's ever simple, should they also be part of a broader, North Atlantic data collection and data sharing thing? Yeah, great.
Sure.
But the switch that drives normal people crazy is what the religion of the Democrats in the administrative state is, that comes with their control and penalties for noncompliance, as opposed to something far more voluntary, which is like a standards organization, right? This is how we'd like to do things. No Maine fisherman wants to catch the last lobster and put the world out of business. No, right? So
Right.
the obnoxious conceit of the administrative state is that they know better, and all us dumb plebes will just do shit until it ends, right? And that is what has to be fought back against,
Yeah.
slightly more eloquently. But yeah, you get the point. And is there a
Yeah.
movement, do you think, in Maine with this? NEFSA as a good example
Well,
as to.
that's exactly what NEFSA is doing, and there are some other people, and then there are a lot of like Maine, House of Reps, and state senators and people who are pushing back, and there's a lot of pressure being thrown at, like in CD2, Congressional District 2 in Maine, where Jared Golden is our current representative. This was a big issue that came up, and so it's a big issue in Maine. A lot of people are aware of it. Probably not as aware of it as they need to be, but we're continuing to, raise concerns about that because, again, like as geez, why can't I remember his name right now? But the guy Jerry Lehman, who is the founder of NEFSA, has said is that, yeah, and my brain will click, but yep, I lost it. So
Yeah, it's all right.
yeah, it's gone. But
moving
the point
toward
is,
localization, getting NOAA out of the way. A bureaucrat in DC should not be writing rules based on what Maine fishermen do as they set off in the morning.
They don't know what's going on. I think that's the biggest problem, is that these people are a bunch of people who read books and do data analysis, and they've never been on a boat. They don't know what it's like for the people on the ground.
That should be requirement number one. Prove to me you've done at least 6 months worth of work on the heaving seas 100%. Waking up at 2 in the morning.
Right, because you're regulating an industry that you don't understand, and so we're regularly, again, everybody's working together to push back against that insanity. And again, as I said before, this same principle, this same idea is affecting like so many other industries. I mean, part of the problem, I think, with I call it corporatization. What's interesting is I'll go over to Kenya, right? And their country is not doing great in terms of economics. However, they have it's not that hard to start a business there. And so there are a ton of businesses. You walk down the road where my wife lives and you can buy everything that you need to buy. Whereas here we've got this world of everything is pushing toward bigger companies and bigger businesses. And then, similar to the regulation that we're talking about, you have the local people who are working here and actually know what's going on are being told what to do by the same idea. Bureaucratic people in the central office that don't know what's going on in that town. So it's happening, but why is that happening? Why is that such a big deal? Because of regulation is pushing and making it more difficult for smaller businesses to be able to compete. I worked in banking, same thing there. In banking, it's really hard for your mid-sized and your small banks to be able to compete against the big guys because they've over-regulated the industry. And who does that benefit? That benefits the big businesses. It benefits Walmart. It benefits
I've been at Wall
Amazon.
Street for 30 years.
Yeah,
I know exactly what we have fought against every single rule that comes up. That so if some stupid new compliance reporting rule pops up and it costs, $500,000 to fill out a form. Well, Goldman and Morgan Stanley and Deutsche Bank, and they don't. Okay, well, that's one more line item. We'll figure out a way to bake it into somebody's fee next year. But that's existential for a community bank. That's ridiculous.
No, it's destroying small business in favor of big business. We saw this, in 2020, with certain businesses being allowed to be open, other ones not being allowed to be open. But it was something that was happening anyway that just, helped it speed up. And that's that's part of the problem is regulation. Regulation makes it so difficult to get into the industry that you don't even need a monopoly necessarily. You got an oligopoly, but you don't need them to make it difficult. They're not the ones making it difficult to enter into the industry. It's regulation. And each new regulation makes it easier and easier for small business, for big businesses. So, for instance, here in the state of Maine, they introduced a new 1% tax on all income. 0.5% is coming out of the business, 0.5% out of the employee, and it's to cover a 12-week for everybody, a 12-week, family leave. And some of the companies that already provide this and already have this for their employees are still having to pay into it, even though their people are not going to be able to use it. They can file for an exemption at some point. But this is going to drive your smaller businesses out of business.
Classic liberal logic.
We care about the employees, so we don't want them to have a job.
Everyone to do something, and you doing it already doesn't exempt you from the new thing. That is perfectly put. You're already doing the thing that we claim everyone should do, and you don't even get to say, well, that's great, we already do it, so I guess we're not part of this new tax. All they can do, they've never met a problem to which the solution is not charge you more money. There is no problem that ever resulted in them saying, let's not charge you more money. And I'm encouraged to see that perhaps Maine is going to get rational. Last question.
Hopefully.
What kind of big one? Like, what's the big thing preoccupying you? You ran for office, you're active, you're keeping your voice out in public, it matters to you. What's the biggest thing that motivates you to speak up in the public square, to make sure people understand issues that you think are of grave importance? Like, what is it that drives you?
Well, I mean, what drives me is I grew up in this state. I've lived here for my entire life. I think it's a beautiful and incredible place, and there are a lot of really incredible people. And part of me says, man, I can just move to Africa. Me and my wife can live there. But it doesn't help my family. It doesn't help my nieces and nephews that are going to grow up in this state no matter what. And there are a lot of people, a lot of good people that are going to grow up here. And unfortunately, because they have been misinformed, they have been led and guided by a corrupt media. I want to do whatever I can to try and help us fall away from us, not be ruined essentially. And it's not just about Maine; it's also about the nation. Like I could say I could go over to Kenya because I'm a U.S. citizen. It would be really easy for me to live there, right?
Yeah.
But if America falls, where do we go? Right, America is the last bastion of hope in the world, and so we need to do everything that we can to stop America from going into ruin, because we're the ones that hold off China. We're the ones that, I think, who knows what's going on with Russia, but we still hold them at bay, even if maybe Trump is more friendly with them, and maybe they're not as bad as anyway. We're the ones that hold them at bay. But without America, it's not just bad for us, it's bad for the world. There are so many people that would be swept up by these other and wars that would happen. And so we've got to stop the insanity. We've got to bring back sense. We've got to stop children from being mutilated and manipulated and twisted. And so that's what motivates me. And so, I do what I can. I have a web design, digital marketing company that kind of is my day job, we'll say. And then I do the podcast. And then I'm also on a couple of boards. Specifically, I'm the chair of the biggest county committee for the Republican Party here in the state, Cumberland County. It's also the most liberal, so most challenging, and it's the biggest, but it's also where there's the most opportunity to kind of, do a better job of getting the message out there, speaking boldly, bringing up the issues that really matter, that I think people just don't realize what the Democrats are doing in Augusta because people aren't telling them.
Right. Oh, fair enough. Well, I tell you, you're doing God's work. Keep it up. I've been up to Maine in ages, guys. It is so insanely beautiful. I can only take it from July 28th to August 18th because I'm a tropical child now.
Yeah.
My blood just can't take it. I was just in DC for CPAC. I thought I was going to die. It was 12 degrees. Everyone's strolling around with their jackets up. Like, this is lovely. It's like, you're insane. I need to go back to the beach. So, well, Chuck, thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate it. look forward to getting this out to the world and hopefully finding other stuff to talk about.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. And to all my regular listeners, just remember, Chuck will remind you too, turn off the mainstream media who are lying to you and tune into Messy Times.
Absolutely.